Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Death Session 63. Not much for 63 other than adding it together is 9, and there's something good about 9. Don't know what that is because I don't follow any numerology and or mathematical quotients, but there is a significance of 9, and we'll keep it at that. There is a significance, and so 63 and doing this this week, what is the significance I seek? And I guess if I boil it down, significance and weightiness and earnestness and all these things tend to be not allies, let's say, in many cases, in my case for sure. When I come across, quote unquote, two people, groups of people, places where I've been thought of as important to the group dynamic and or a leader and or a good follower and or any of these things, it was usually the humor that brought me to the top of these social structures, not my significance, not my earnestness. And maybe my earnestness wasn't as bad as some of the other ones I listed off, but obviously the idea of taking yourself too seriously is something I am prone to do. Maybe we all are. It's why we're often warned against it. And I think my forays into comedy were to, basically see myself as not so precious. But what happened is sort of when you get into these enclaves, certainly where I was in college and stuff, the natural gift for comedy was hard to exploit when you are working on Elizabethan bowing techniques. And while there are funny monologues and funny speeches in Shakespeare, they are of a time, and one of the best compliments or good reviews I got in plays was that in the Merchant of Venice, I was one of the few comedic moments and I think this thing did slip by us because as we were being rehearsed, and I guess it was incumbent, I guess if you just read the front page of the title page, I think it says A Merchant of Venice, a comedy in 5 acts or something like that. But I think that was lost on us and that production, that Merchant of Venice is one of the comedies, because we often have a preponderance of pretentiousness when it comes to Shakespeare, when it really was very sort of, it would have been, would have been on Netflix. Shakespeare would have been like Netflix. He would have been Shonda Rhimes, He would have been... he would have been cranking out, maybe Taylor Sheridan, Shonda Rhimes. He would have been cranking out stuff, and the stuff would have been go-to, and it would have been timely and of the moment, and very, very well kind of received in the idea that this stuff was mass media. And then so what's happened is it also, like many things that are sort of subversive in their quality, will stand the test of time as it lingers and as it stays there. And that's the battle I've often fought. And I don't know if to say I fought it is also maybe a ponderous notion, but my dreams and my wishes for my life are often straddling the art and commerce. And so I often feel stressed and behind the 8 ball vis-a-vis the commerce part. And I, for many years, or for the few times that things have gone, that I've fought through a lot of my issues to create, the feedback was good enough that I could have taken a W. Because of the artistic value, maybe not so much a commerce value, and that was and that would be wrapped up in the inevitability of having to judge yourself based on commerce versus artistic. And so obviously people staying in academia, staying on campuses and teaching young charges about that may fall short because they have, and I'm not picking on anybody, but they have receded into the realm of academia and the realm of theater, theatricality. So when someone says things are theatrical, I know in my kind of bones what that refers to. And it is, it's hard to articulate. It's kind of like theatricality refers to something on stage that, for lack of a better way to describe it, would be in tune, like an orchestra being in tune. An orchestra just sitting on the stage with their music, and they're arrayed in that horseshoe, and where the instruments are, and the drums in the back, and all of that is to do the EQ, the equalizing that we didn't have access to in the pre-electrical age. So the things are set up strictly to blend of the orchestra, and what to emphasize is basically who plays what and when, and that comes from the sheet music, et cetera, et cetera. But on a stage, and so that you sit there and you sort of enjoy the sounds, and you're impressed by the playing up there, and that is live, but it's not per se a theatrical event, except for where things become theatrical is if they combine a solo or if they combine singing. And so that mere act of one violinist taking center stage from seat 2 or seat, usually the first violinist gets the solo, that cross from the chair in the orchestra to the front and to do the solo, that is a theatrical moment. And things like, obviously musicals I have a harder time musicals are theatrical purely, but things like, converting a table into, doing things like pushing a table or a block and having Hamilton jump up on the table as he's rallying a tavern full of listeners, that moment of converting from just a dude singing on a stage to boom, jumping up on a table, here we are, and then using a narration to connote location, that is theatrical. You know what I mean? And so those vocabulary terms make things theatrical. And I guess I went off on a tangent about that, but that's very hefty, lofty stuff. I don't know if I've told this story before, but we had visiting artists often. And I think the idea was to bring in professionals that were outside of the faculty to sort of give you an assertion or a feel for what lay out there in the world, and what you also know sort of as they are visiting artists. That's also a payday for somebody who may or may not be looking for that may or may not have been placed by an agent or placed by some back channel, and who they were depending on the time, the year, what was going on in their lives, where our esteem was. Like there's a director named Rob Marshall. He won an Oscar for Chicago. He would often come to direct main stage plays at Carnegie Mellon, but I don't know that he taught an actual class for any length of time. And that was like being jobbed in. For him, he probably had himself lined up on his rise as a big stage director into a film director. Like he was, making his bones directing very talented college productions, right? Students. But we had one visiting artist, and he came from New York. He was on the older side, and he was from, I think he had done some film. I think I had researched him to some degree and found out he worked with Brando and something. But he was sort of an elder statesman, and for some reason he had a subversive tinge to his. He basically came to class to shit on us, to tell us that we were this university brought us into the fold because we already knew how to act. And that why would you need to be taught how to do something you automatically and organically knew how to do? Hence, you were brought into the program with your audition. And so he's like, he was, for some reason, very contrarian. And as you get older and you understand how these things work, you find out that, there was not a lot of oversight. He was jobbed in. What damage could he do in his 6 weeks or whatever it might have been? And it was okay to have a dissent maybe, or nobody was paying attention, or it was too big, or, or I was being sensitive, or, maybe I was the only one paying attention. Who knows, right? But he had one incredible, he had 2 exercises that I thought were overly simple, but then achieved well in the us doing the job and him explaining what it was. One of them was write a poem and come back with it for the next class. And then he took the poems away from us and held on to them, I think. And then he disseminated the poems to other people. And then we were to come back and create some kind of piece, either a 1-character thing or a 2-character thing, but the only text we could use was that poem that someone else had written. And so when people came up with these odd little skits, I hate to say skits because people in theater and drama school, nothing is a skit. It's either a presentation, an exercise, or, but a skit is a very insulting or beneath it word. But we would do these scenarios based on the text that was provided, and people would go up there and they were, the varying degrees of, I think there were some they couldn't be that long. That was one thing, but some varying degrees of the poetry, but also some varying degrees of the interpretation, what they put out there, how seriously they took it, how good of an actor they were, that kind of thing. And some were less vivid than others, and others were good. And I forget, I kind of remember who did mine, and he did okay with it, but he kind of missed the point, is how I put in my head. And so that was the lesson. The lesson was after everyone had performed theirs, and he basically said how many people felt that they misinterpreted their poem. Half the hands went up. How many people thought it, brought something new to it? So some hands went up. And basically he was saying that is the job of the actor, and that's how a playwright feels. And so it is very important to take this sort of seriously, because you could be sort of quote unquote fucking up these very important words. He did also say that the writing of it needed to mean something to you. And so the point he was trying to make is a playwright or anybody puts these words in your hands, the text, and it can go fucking many different ways. And that is the responsibility of the actor or the theater professional, is to try to honor the words you were given. And just imagining letting go of that, or how collaborative it was. And it was very interesting because some poems were really well written, some weren't. Some people got more juice out of the lemon than other people, and some were way off the mark, but it was still interesting. So, and you could see that when people do Shakespeare and they update it, they put the Scottish play. They put the Scottish play and they set it in World War I, World War II. They update the costumes out of either budgetary necessity or some kind of read on it, and also to always prove how contemporary, even though it was very, how contemporary it can be in translation. But oftentimes it's a director with too much of a wish to put a stamp on Shakespeare, and that's always been the thing. But then there's an over precious reverence for the text, that is, it's blaspheming to do anything other than the original intention. But that was a great lesson he learned, and he was just basically trying to remind everybody to know that it meant a lot for whoever wrote this, so that to not take it lightly. Everything you could possibly do to unearth the meaning, unearth the sort of, doing your best detective work. And that's the fun part of any kind of acting. It sucks when you're only getting little parts, but the detective work and the fantasy of being a working actor for me, and I think it'd be true of a lot of people, is just I'm a voracious person in terms of curiosity. The things I'm curious about, I would not be able to master all of the things that fascinate me, because you'd have to put so much time into being a lawyer. You'd have to put in so much time into being a doctor that you couldn't. Theoretically, you could do both. I'm sure there are these mega geniuses that go to college when they're 14 that can get a law degree and a medical degree. I knew people who got MBAs and law degrees sort of simultaneous with a computer science to begin with. So, there are those people, but a working actor at a certain level gets to approach parts and do research on subjects of their characters to a wide degree. So I can't go into the military at my age anymore. But if I play someone who's been in, then I can do all that stuff. And that's that is for me the fantasy of a working actor, is to take on all that research and that detective work of like a varying swath of careers, of corners of the world, corners of the psyche, And and this is really highfalutin shit. And I swore I was starting this off by mentioning that The Merchant of Venice was a comedy, and that if you take yourself too seriously, the stuff gets ponderous. But I guess my nature is down the middle, and I wanted this stuff to be lighter. But the whole notion of being reverent, but also knowing when, just reading the damn title page, I didn't know until the review came out that I was working on a comedy. I know that I had a little bit of a leeway with my character to rock the mic and be funny, and that was going back to the compliments I got, was that people were saying I was so loose and so I could give such a shit that it was like I was channeling stand-up comedy vibes in Shakespeare, which wound up being what I did with a lot of time in my life. So, but that is the fantasy, to do the detective work, to do do your best to make this text in line with its destiny, its purpose, not bastardizing the words, not being flippant with someone else's words. And that was the one thing he said. How many people sat there thinking, you're brutalizing my work? And he goes, just imagine what a playwright might feel. And that was cool. But then that's obviously, you're not going to get told to go and write dick jokes in drama school when a professor from outside of the department is telling you to be reverent of the text. You know what I mean? And so he had some agendas, but that was a very elucidating exercise. And it was it was the first time that I recall that we were called upon to be a creator, not an interpreter, meaning we got to put pen to paper, and in drama school, that's not the point. That would be the playwriting avenue, would be the pen to paper. Actors are like just in the service of the text, right? So that's what was vivid with that. And then where we got creative was we always had to do these sort of acting scenes, sometimes alone, and we'd have to set up scenarios and use other actors and do these sort of improvisations, and that's where we got creative. But and then the second exercise after we did that one, which was basically his intro to, like, this is what's at stake here, and this is why you have to be a really you got to be a detective. And it's so much easier now, although I did love going to the library. I really love digging in the stacks, and I liked, feeling like a student, and I did enjoy that. I wish I had I feel like we were overworked, so I was often sleepy and sluggish when I needed my brain to work, because, we were working 12 hours a day just on a schedule, at least. Maybe 10, 12 hours a day, sometimes more. But the second exercise, and like I said, if I've already mentioned this, I apologize. But he said, come in tomorrow and audition for the circus. And everybody kind of rolled their eyes, and this is even in drama school, the idea of being a good student or not being a free thinker, I guess, would come up. The people were like, what do you mean? I don't juggle. And he's like, I didn't say you had to be good at anything. It's just that your job tomorrow is to come in and audition for the circus. So I think the idea, anyway, I'll tell you what we did. I had my partner, and this was where his little agenda and his organization was pretty good. He said, the person who did your poem as a monologue, that's who your partner in this will be. And I think the guy who did my I think that's how he did it. But anyway, I had a good vibe with the cat, and we had a great idea. The idea we were going to do was to do like an Italian Houdini, but like a duo, like the two Carboni brothers or some shit. And that was our shtick, and we would do accents and be hilarious. And we were going to do knife throwing with the woman on the wall and, throwing to the head and between the shoulders and between the legs. And we were going to do knife throwing, but, we're not going to actually throw knives. So, and I'm not sure if it was my idea. Let's just say it was all organically in the ether. But the idea I had, I think, it was definitely what we wound up doing, was when you were in grade school, that if you took wet toilet paper, you could throw it to the ceiling, you could throw it against somebody's back. It was like a fucking projectile of a soggy toilet paper, and it would stick on the wall and hard. Like I think it's like the origin of paper mache, right? So we decided that we would make these little toilet paper bombs, and we would practice throwing to the targets, and then we had these huge backdrops that we could move around these audition rooms and these rehearsal rooms, and they were tall, and you instead of using it as a riser, we stood it up as a backdrop, and it was that matte paint. It was like a platform, and on its standing up, it was over 6 feet, 7 feet tall. So then we would get a volunteer and we would practice, but the night before, we were giddy with anticipation for our idea, because it also, when the toilet paper hit, it would hit the plywood and be like, boof, and it would make this fucking sound, and we were throwing hard. And so the idea was then that day we would get a volunteer. We practiced on each other standing there, but then we would get a volunteer, or I think we did it to each other, and I don't know if we got a volunteer, but the idea is I stood there and he chucked it at me, and we did the blind, I don't know, whatever the fuck we did. We made it, kind of, and we got good, and we basically say one up top, one in the arms, one in the arm, and then the money shot was between the legs, right? And it would all hit and stick to the thing, so the quote unquote toilet paper knife would stick, and it was great. It was a great idea. And so we went into class. We did our whole shtick with the we're from Italy. We're going to butchering some Italian accents, and we were wearing like juggling tights and like circus freak stuff, and I don't know if we might have even been Karamazov, even though that's Russian, but we had this idea that we were this brother duo of like a Penn and Teller thing, and so the first guy goes, and he's standing there, and you're playing up the whole like, this is very deadly, and nobody wants to get hit in the face with wet toilet paper. We built it all up. We milked it. And then right above the head, the whole fucking, and the class is like, ah! And then we're like, okay, we're going to do it under the arm. Oh shit, you did it there, under the arm, and finally, Rinalmente, right between the legs, and it leaves this disgusting like toilet paper splat, right? And we got through the first cycle, nobody got hurt. You know what I'm saying? No knife landed. So, and then we switched it up and we built it back up again, and it was just like shoo-boom, shoo-boom, shoo-boom. And now, as we were successful with each throw, the idea was, would we fuck up? And so by the, let's say, what was that, 5? The 10th throw, we were 9 for 9, and then and the whole class was like, ah! Everybody lost their shit because we did it. Nobody missed. And we took our bows and we did, the whole shtick. And he was the guest artist who had not enjoyed us very much, to be honest with you. His whole thing was to use common sense in text and do less, right? So he would often see these earnest students trying too hard doing things, and he would point them out, but it made you feel stupid. And I kind of dug it a little bit because it was like a common sense approach, and I liked that kind of tell it like it is, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, I would say that with his time with us, that he said that's one of the best versions of this assignment I've ever seen. And he explained it, that the peril was real, and it was real, but not, it wasn't a knife throwing. But he said, you guys just really did that. It was incredible. And it was, the tension was real, because like I said, if you got hit when we practiced, it's disgusting, but you'd get hit with the fucking toilet paper and you'd have to wipe it off, and it didn't hurt. It wasn't life threatening, but no one wants to get hit with a glob of toilet paper. And it stuck. And he's like, it was exactly, and very theatrical. So you could imagine, you could do that every night and have to, and then you would have to, and then also there was the stakes of the guy throwing. We were just so confident, and we threw it hard, so that there was this violence of when it hit the backdrop, it splattered. It had everything. And I dare say that was a very theatrical thing. And so those are very hard to do. And why people nod out in plays is because they're not thinking in the vocabulary of the theatrical conceit and all that. The whole conceit was we were knife throwers, but we were throwing toilet paper. And maybe some people would do it with like a pantomime and the sound cue, but then you'd have to act the peril. And if we brought a volunteer up, that poor bastard was putting trust in our hands, and we were trusting each other. And if it was a female, even in drama school, in sweats and tights or whatever, nobody wants to get hit in the face, in the hair with toilet paper. So the whole thing had the actual stakes of reality. And so that was a very successful day in class that added up to nothing in terms of commerce or even art. It was just a very vivid day, one that I'm talking about 30 years later, and it reminds you that those are the things that I have to, and that's why a one-man show has always been a perplexing notion for me, because you can't do that with one person. I guess you could juggle, you could do some kind of balancing or something, but like I'm talking about the context of the circus was the assignment, and so it was dead on circus / sideshow, So how do you set up those moments of theatricality in a one-man show? Probably with the writing, and that's where, if there is a plot twist in a story, you would, if there was a plot twist in the story, that's your best bet. But if you're doing a sort of confessional, sort of a sermon almost with your one-man show, there's not a lot of that. You're not telling a yarn. You're just trying to be entertaining, and you're trying to process the ideas in an entertaining way. But I remember that vividly as one of my best days in class, and it was sort of the rub the rub of it all was, I was often in academic probation and had trouble with the faculty, and not trouble, but I was just a very stressed out guy back then, and it was a victory that didn't register with the powers that be, and it left me very invigorated, and I don't know that he participated in my grade that semester, but it was the kind of breakthrough and brilliant idea that almost could seal a fate for your trajectory the rest of the way with the powers that be. But what's really important is what I'm telling myself now is the resilience of the career of the craft that didn't mean anything at the time, even though I thought it did. And that ability to seize a moment, to seize creativity, to seize the joy and the specter of theatricality and the specter of a little help from above, if you will, because we could have very easily been 0 for 5, and if all we needed was for the first one to fucking succeed. Do you know what I mean? And these platforms were so big that we could throw overhand and kind of, even if we missed our target, as long as we didn't hit the human, we were almost pretty sure we could, and that was the other part. Like, if the first toilet paper knife throw hit somebody, the gag is over. So there was a whole leap of faith and a whole clutch kind of competitive thing that was thrown upon it. And I guess that, bringing that up today and knowing what my play is, you want to create at least a few of those moments. Somehow. I would say you would, if you're lucky to get one and make that the climax of your show. But if you can have several of those, when they talk about ear candy, when a song has hooks, that's what you're trying to do with theater. And in film, you're trying to capture that. Rocky is great. For many reasons. One of the reasons Rocky is great is because of the underdog story and the stick-to-itiveness, and that he doesn't win, and the grittiness. But in the storytelling, there are vivid. The egg, when he eats eggs, raw eggs, and swallows those down, that is a pillar moment. Wordless and theatrical, cinematic, I guess would be the vocabulary he'd use there. But when he powers down and he's at the kitchen, the camera is above the fridge, and he crushes and he swallows those fucking eggs down. That actor is drinking raw eggs. That camera is just watching a dude crush some raw eggs. And you can't forget it. The other one, of course, is the literal and figurative running up the stairs. It's so iconic that it is Daniel in the Lion's Den. It is Jonah and the Whale. It is Rocky going up the stairs. Those are iconic moments, and they are cinematic and or theatrical. I'm trying to think of famous theatrical moments in famous plays, but that's a little harder because you can't have special effects. You can't shoot somebody and have a blood splatter. I mean, I guess you could, but I have seen plays where they manifest the hanging and that sound effect and that and then the feet dangling, which is probably just an actor swinging their legs. But that idea of this, that's a theatrical thing you can pull off. And these are just to create, and I think what we forget is everybody's navel gazing and everybody's trying to get attention, myself included. But if you're not really working on the art and the craft of it, you're not going to stumble upon these great moments. And I don't know that I necessarily have them in my one-man show. It might be easier to do. I stole, in my play in New York, Knee Deep, I stole the Rocky kind of template because I had a character wake up from a night of drinking and be so fucking hungover that he did. I asked the guy if he had any. The character said, "You got any? How long has this tomato juice been around?" And he goes, "I don't know, the Carter administration." And I had near beer, and I poured the near beer, and then I poured tomato juice, and on stage I powered down fucking, a whole glass of tomato juice and beer, and that was an homage to Rocky, and a way for my director was saying that those you have a few of these pillar moments where it's a non-verbal, descriptive thing where the prop in the character possessing a prop elucidates the story. The big turnaround is a prop, and the audience will go, oh shit, just from a guy walking into the room with the right prop, or me drinking out of the pint glass and swallowing it whole on stage, big gulping it, and then burping or struggling with it, being out of breath, having to recover, all that, and then still saying the lines, but it would change every night. And that is theatrical. Do you know what I mean? And so this is a good reminder for me to look at my script and look for some imagery, or look for some posing, or look for a way into a story, or look for a light cue, or look for my version of Rocky going up the stairs, but in a theater, i.e. looking for a way to audition for the circus, which was his point. And God bless that guy for that message. He was tough and brutal and subversive, and maybe a little burnt out and not too impressed with us, but he got that message across, and it was well learned by me anyway. And again, I was a little bit more ready for vivid, real-world, hands-on, tough love lessons, maybe because of my playing sports or whatever, but oftentimes there were a lot of whining and complaining from my classmates about these, what were not, there was nothing to be gained there. In fact, my partner in that scene and we contributed, and this is where you get the teacher and the student and who's really doing the teaching and who's doing the learning. We provided the value-added moment for him to have his lesson vividly come across. And so we were the catalyst for the learning there. And that is the power that we all have, right? We all have the power to be the lesson and to be the, and that for me is the drive for creativity. That's thankfully somehow I found that spark. Once I figured out, probably way too late in life, that my need for attention probably was a hindrance to my creative flow, and that channeling, whatever you want to call it, the divine spark, the muse, the channeling the ether, listening to the wind, praying, all these sort of metaphysical things are where creativity lies, and hopefully taking commerce out and putting art back in is maybe my best chance. All our best chances. Good Will Hunting apparently was a one-act play that Matt Damon was writing in his first year or two at Harvard, and his professor said, this is really good, you should probably continue this, but it languished for a long time. And so, and obviously that was a breakthrough, and it was art and commerce coming together, and we'd all be so lucky, and we've all, that's the generation I'm from, and so we've all been trying to duplicate that. That's why I wrote a play in New York, was because they put themselves on the map, as it were. You could also see that their pedigree before that was that they'd been in some movies, and Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were in films before, and were on a trajectory, but they weren't in that making their own destiny until they channeled the creative spark. And their version of throwing knives of toilet paper was really crafting a beautiful, beautiful script that they knew they could bring, and that they were the right guys, and somehow they pulled it off. And the Stallone, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, that's a through line, because Stallone did, famously wanted, push that thing through for a vehicle for himself, because he knew he had channeled something. And and I think that's why you can be so brave in the face of obstacles is when you kind of give in and get it off yourself. You know what I mean? Ultimately, you'll get the attention you seek by being open to the channel, as it were. And I guess that's a lesson I had to relearn, even just sitting down today. And so in real time, that story coming about, which I may have told before, but maybe not as vividly, now I understand that somewhere along the divine line or the lineage of the listening for great ideas, that the fact that it didn't get me a grade, the fact that nobody but this fucking guest artist who took his check and got the fuck out of Dodge, and my classmates will even have seen it, or none of them will remember it. But that, for me, because I was so certain it was that few, right place, right time, couldn't be anywhere else, couldn't do anything else, came up with it. And it, a room full of 12 people clapping and losing their shit and being inspired by it. Maybe it wasn't enough for the commerce or it definitely was not the toilet paper shot heard around the world, but it was a good example in an incubator that is really what we seek, is that theatricality, that cinematic thing, and they've codified it to a degree. Certainly in music, they've codified it. What music is the best example, because things that make you weep, if you break the sheet music, can explain it all, which then gives you pause for how a lot of artists like to be free flowing and without discipline, and they don't want to learn music because it'll take away their spontaneity. But you can reverse engineer a song, and everything is in the sheet music: the time signature, the key, the pace, right? That's the time signature. Then it's got crescendo, and pianissimo, and it's literally like a marked script. And we leave it to the actor to do his own, pianissimo, and to do our own fortissimo, and we leave it up to the actor to do that. But that's why it's an art form that also appeals to me, because it is off the sheet music isn't everything. And then I guess they would say, even the greatest sight reading geniuses and musicians would say, that there's still an alchemy, there's still a je ne sais quoi, there's still a chance for inspiration and for certain nights being better than others, even if they didn't miss a note. There's just that sort of double boiling trouble. Like, there's still that, the orchestra still practices, and they still, starts off real rough, and then by the end, I don't know, there's still better nights than others. But, and this is what we learned in our conservatory, is that if you're at the professional level, that can't be perceptible to an audience, even in a play. So yeah, you can miss a note, and that wouldn't be the worst. That'd be the equivalent of missing a line. And you could have it not feel so good to you in your heart and soul, and you could be a little sluggish and hungover. But the play itself and the show itself can't be perceptible to the audience paying. And that's where they say technique overrides. But that's where I think it's a starting all over again. Because if we had to do that knife throwing thing one more time, and we started missing, because we would start to get in our heads, if we started missing the throws, the whole fucking thing would suffer. And here again is why the lesson of that is so incredible. Because the paying audience can't watch you miss. It's why I can't stand watching fucking figure skating. I just can't fucking take it, because these motherfuckers been working on it for their whole lives, and then they go up in the air, like, I can't skate backwards, so like you could just skate backwards and I'd be like 10. They go up in the air on an axle or a triple Lutz or whatever the hell it's called, and when they wipe out, it's too much. And and you can still win the gold if you have a wipeout, I think, but everybody else would have to wipe out with the same deduction. And then it's the risk reward. If someone's going to do a triple spin, which is going to be higher risk, but a higher, and it's just it's just too much. I can't watch that shit because I don't want to see people's whole fucking life go crumbling down on one mistake on a pressure cooker like that. Because to me, that's a tough one for sports. It's one thing. And it's the same way. I mean, it's just the guys who fumble, guy misses a field goal. I have pangs of empathy for those people who are on the edge of catastrophe, and yet they are still the best athlete and best skater or best that anyone ever ran into. And sure, it sucks to miss a line or to go blank or to bomb as a stand-up comic, but like it's not the same because thankfully you live to fight another day. You live to, and that's why I think context is actually everything. There is no tension without context. She falls on her ass all day in practice on the ice. It's when you contextualize it, this is for the gold medal, that same fall or that same turn, that's where context comes into play. And I think that's what good storytelling has to also think about is their context. That's what's lost in reels, and that's what's lost in the way we're entertaining us. A dog video doesn't really have context. It's just a cute ass dog, and I watch way too many dog videos. But for something to be contextualized, also turns the heat up. Just for an example, the Good Will Hunting, you find out soon that Skylar is leaving. He meets her in the wrong. He's got there's a shelf life on this relationship if he doesn't and it puts a little bit of a context on it. He's got to it's just well done. And I hope, and I will, I really hope, and my dream boarding and my vision and stuff like that is a prayer to be able to do the what other people find arduous is stuff I like to do. Reading, detective work, finding out, watching bad movies, having a database, knowing the director, producer, all these things. Remembering moments from my life, writing down contextual things, and just I guess the prayer and the leap of faith, my knife throw, my William Tell arrow shot is we're in the late stages of it, and I hope to run up those stairs like Rocky and make it to the top, even now. And that will be different. The definition of that is probably my business, but that is the aim and that is the dream. And I don't know that I gave the context today for making this quippy again, clippable. I doubt. And again, ponderous and not. That was my problem with stand-up. I wanted to be deep, man. And it's really, you're up there to be funny. And so I have to remember, though, that comedy in the Shakespeare and drama school terms is, I think, more about the definition of comedy and the definition of tragedy. And so a comedy, it doesn't have the same context as stand-up comedy. A comedy meant, I think, it spoke more to the absurdity, and I think it literally it ends well. I think the tragedies ended in the death of the main character, and the comedies were while they weren't laugh out loud, they were frivolous. They had happy endings. The comedies are where the gender bending would happen in Shakespeare. But Merchant of Venice is in that weird thing because it's got that Shylock speech, which is often used as like an early civil rights sort of template almost, and hath not a Jew eyes, that kind of thing. And so it gets blurry, and then you forget that all that glitters is not gold. That was the guy I played. I had that line. And so, anyway, I guess I leave you with a feeling of inspiration, and I will leave it at that. If it wasn't a yuck fest, at least it was upbeat to where it has been before on the Death Session. So thank you, and this was 63 Carl DeGregorio Death Session. Peace.